Official field reports. Unedited camera footage. Pure justice. You are watching Bodycam incident reports.
Turn around. Hands on the folding table. Now.
Officer, I'm folding laundry. I paid for this machine.
I said now. You're trespassing. You're making people nervous.
You need to slow down and check your
Don't
facts.
tell me how to do my job. Turn around.
Turn around. Put your hands on the folding table. Do it now. Excuse me, I am folding my laundry, officer. I said put your hands on the table, or I will put you on the ground. You are trespassing. Trespassing, I paid $4 for this machine. I have my receipt right here on the cart. I don't care what you have. The owner wants you gone. You're making people nervous. Move now. You are making a mistake, son. I suggest you lower your voice and check your facts. Don't call me son. Turn around. Officer Derek Thorne had been a patrol officer with the Metro Police Department for just under 4 years. He was 29 years old, pumped full of adrenaline and a misguided sense of authority, convinced that his badge granted him the power to judge character at a glance. On a bright Tuesday morning in October, he walked into the Clean Spin Laundromat with a decision already made. He wasn't there to investigate. He was there to enforce. The man he was shouting at was Marcus Holloway, a 62-year-old man standing quietly by a dryer, meticulously folding a heavy wool blanket. What Thorne saw was a large black man in a hooded sweatshirt who didn't look like he belonged in the newly gentrified district. What Thorne didn't see, because his bias wouldn't allow him to, was a retired sergeant major of the United States Marine Corps, a man who had led battalions into combat and earned the respect of generals. What happened in the next 15 minutes would cost the city $1.7 million. It would strip Derek Thorne of his badge, his pension, and his reputation. It would expose the ugly underbelly of assumption and prejudice that still rots within our institutions. But before we get to the settlement, before we get to the viral video that millions of you watched with your jaw on the floor, we need to understand how we got here. Where are you watching from today? If you believe that respect should be earned and not demanded by a badge, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We bring you these stories because the truth matters. The Clean Spin Laundromat sits on the corner of Elm and Main, right where the old industrial district meets the new luxury condos. For decades, it was a blue-collar spot. Now it has polished concrete floors, app-based payment systems, and a clientele that drinks $7 lattes while waiting for their yoga pants to dry. It was 10:15 a.m. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The hum of 20 dryers provided a white noise backdrop to the morning. Marcus Holloway had been coming to this laundromat for 10 years, long before the new owner bought it and doubled the prices. Marcus stood 6'3", with the broad shoulders of a man who had spent his life carrying heavy burdens. He kept his hair high and tight, a habit from 30 years of service that he saw no reason to break. He was wearing a plain gray hoodie, dark sweatpants, and pristine running shoes. He moved with an economy of motion, a precise, deliberate rhythm that you only see in men who have been trained to value order above all else. On this particular Tuesday, Marcus wasn't washing his own clothes. He was washing 20 heavy wool blankets for the local veterans shelter downtown. The industrial machines at the shelter were broken, and the cold snap was coming. Marcus didn't complain. He loaded his truck, drove to Clean Spin, and fed $40 worth of quarters into the jumbo washers. He was doing a good deed. He was minding his own business. He hadn't spoken a word to anyone except to say, "Good morning," to an elderly woman struggling with a laundry cart. But to the eyes watching him from the back office, Marcus Holloway was a threat. He was a variable that didn't fit the equation. And in a world where suspicion is often treated as evidence, being a black man in a hoodie folding blankets was enough to trigger a chain reaction that would ruin lives. To understand the magnitude of the insult that was about to occur, you have to understand the man standing at that folding table. Marcus Holloway enlisted in the Marine Corps when he was 18 years old. He didn't join because he had no other options. He joined because he believed in service. He served in Grenada. He served in the First Gulf War, leading a platoon through the burning oil fields of Kuwait. He did 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan when he was well into his 40s, refusing a desk job because he wouldn't send young men where he wasn't willing to go himself. He retired with the rank of Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank in the Corps. His uniform, currently hanging in a plastic bag in his closet at home, was heavy with ribbons. The Bronze Star with a V for Valor, the Purple Heart, the Navy Commendation Medal. He was a man who had been entrusted with the lives of thousands of Marines. He had briefed congressional committees. He had shaken the hands of 2 presidents. His entire life was built on a foundation of discipline, honor, and integrity. Since retiring, Marcus lived a quiet life. He volunteered at the VA hospital 3 days a week. He helped run a mentorship program for at-risk youth. He was a deacon at his church. He was the kind of neighbor who snowblowed the entire block's sidewalk without being asked. He was 62 years old with a touch of arthritis in his knees and a hearing aid in his left ear, a souvenir from a mortar explosion in Fallujah. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that usually commanded respect without him having to say a word. But the neighborhood around him was changing. The people who knew him, who knew he was the Sarge, were moving out, pushed away by rising rents. The new neighbors didn't know about his service. They didn't know he had saved lives. They just saw a large black man, and in the eyes of the new demographic trying to reshape the neighborhood, he was out of place. This Tuesday was supposed to be simple. The shelter needed the blankets. The weatherman called for frost by Thursday. Marcus had packed the blankets into 2 large military-issue duffel bags, green canvas stenciled with his name and rank, though the black lettering had faded over the years. He arrived at Clean Spin at 8:45 a.m., loaded 4 of the extra-large machines, and sat quietly reading a paperback novel while they ran. When the cycles finished, he moved the wet wool to the dryers. He was efficient. He cleaned up a spill of detergent that wasn't even his. The laundromat wasn't empty. There were about 6 other customers. A middle-aged woman reading a magazine, a young man in a suit working on a laptop, 2 older gentlemen discussing baseball in the corner. None of them paid Marcus any mind. He was just another person doing chores. The atmosphere was peaceful. The smell of dryer sheets and fabric softener filled the air. Marcus checked his watch. 10:10 a.m. The blankets were dry. He began the process of folding them. If you've never seen a Marine fold something you haven't seen folding. Every corner aligned perfectly. Every edge crisp. He stacked them in neat piles on the long stainless steel table, preparing to load them back into his duffel bags. He was humming a hymn quietly to himself, Amazing Grace. He was at peace. He had no idea that 10 feet away behind a glass partition, he was being watched by someone who saw his duffel bags and his hoodie and decided that Marcus Holloway was a blight on the business. Kyle Vance was 34 years old and had owned Clean Spin for exactly 3 months. He had used an inheritance to buy the business planning to turn it into a boutique laundry experience. He installed Wi-Fi, put up abstract art, and raised the prices. Kyle was the type of man who used words like aesthetic and vibe when talking about a place where people washed their underwear. He was deeply concerned with the image of his business. He wanted to attract the young professionals from the condos across the street. He did not want what he called the old element. Kyle had been watching Marcus on the security monitor for 20 minutes. He didn't see a veteran doing charity work. He saw a large man with suspicious military-style bags. In Kyle's limited worldview, duffel bags meant homelessness. They meant someone moving their entire life from place to place. He assumed Marcus was washing all his worldly possessions. He assumed Marcus was going to loiter. He assumed the other customers were uncomfortable even though no one had even looked in Marcus's direction. Kyle's bias was not subtle. He had already called the police twice in his first month of ownership, once on a delivery driver who parked too close to the entrance, and once on a teenager selling candy bars for a school fundraiser. He felt it was his duty to police the perimeter. He walked out of his office pretending to check a vending machine just to get a closer look. He saw the pile of wool blankets. Must be camping gear, he thought. He's probably camping in the park. Kyle walked back to his office, his heart rate elevating for no reason other than his own prejudice. He decided he didn't want Marcus there. It didn't matter that Marcus had paid. It didn't matter that he was a customer. Kyle wanted a certain look for his shop, and Marcus didn't fit it. At 10:12 a.m., Kyle Vance picked up the phone and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Yes, I need an officer at Clean Spin on Elm Street. I have a trespasser here who refuses to leave. Is the individual violent? Do they have a weapon? He's very large. He has these big military bags. He's loitering. I asked him to leave and he became belligerent. He's scaring my customers. This was a lie. A direct, calculated lie. Kyle had never spoken to Marcus. He hadn't asked him to leave. Marcus had not been belligerent. He had been humming a hymn. But Kyle knew the buzzwords. He knew that saying belligerent and scaring customers would get a faster response than "there's a guy doing laundry I don't like." Okay, sir. We have a unit in the area. Officers are on the way. Stay inside and do not approach the individual. Kyle hung up the phone with a smirk. He felt powerful. He felt like he was taking out the trash. He watched the monitor waiting for the police to arrive and do his dirty work. He didn't care about the truth. He cared about his aesthetic. He had no idea he had just called the police on a man who had commanded more respect in a single morning briefing than Kyle Vance would earn in his entire life. Officer Derek Thorne was bored. He had been patrolling Sector 4 for 3 hours and had nothing to show for it but a parking ticket and a noise complaint. Thorne was a man who had become a police officer for the wrong reasons. He liked the gear. He liked the car. He liked the feeling of people stepping aside when he walked down a hallway. He viewed the citizens of his district not as a community to serve, but as subjects to control. His personnel file was riddled with minor complaints, rudeness, foul language, intimidation. But like so many others, he had slipped through the cracks of a system that often prioritized closing cases over building trust. When the call came over the radio, "Disturbance at Clean Spin. Subject is a black male belligerent refusing to leave." Thorne lit up. This was action. This was a chance to assert dominance. He didn't hear investigate. He heard remove. He hit the lights and sirens, cutting through traffic with aggressive swerves that were entirely unnecessary for a non-violent trespassing call. He arrived at the laundromat at 10:19 a.m., pulling his cruiser up onto the sidewalk blocking the wheelchair ramp. He wanted to make an entrance. He wanted everyone to know the law had arrived. Thorne stepped out of the vehicle. He adjusted his duty belt, resting his hand near his holster. He wasn't thinking about de-escalation. He was thinking about the story he'd tell in the locker room. He walked through the automatic doors with his chest puffed out, scanning the room. The laundromat was quiet. The hum of the machines was the only sound. Thorne saw the customers, the woman with the magazine, the guy on the laptop. And then he saw Marcus. Marcus was facing away from the door, folding the last blanket. He was calm. His posture was relaxed. He didn't look like a threat. But Thorne had the dispatcher's voice in his head. Belligerent. Refusing to leave. Confirmation bias is a dangerous drug. Thorne looked at the large duffel bags and the hoodie and decided the manager was right. This was a vagrant causing trouble. Thorne didn't walk over to the manager's office to get the story. He didn't ask the other customers if there was a problem. He marched straight toward Marcus, his boots heavy on the polished floor. He bypassed every protocol of community policing in favor of immediate confrontation. "Hey, you!" Thorne barked, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Marcus didn't jump. He didn't flinch. He slowly turned his head, looking over his shoulder with the practiced patience of a man who had dealt with nervous privates and angry generals. "Are you speaking to me, officer?" Marcus asked, his voice deep and steady. "Yeah, I'm speaking to you. Grab your stuff. You're leaving." Thorne stopped 5 feet away, invading Marcus's personal space. The dynamic was set. On one side, a young officer desperate to prove his toughness. On the other, a battle-hardened veteran who knew exactly who he was. The air in the laundromat shifted instantly. The woman with the magazine lowered it. The man with the laptop closed the lid. Everyone was watching. Leaving. Marcus turned fully around now, resting his hands on the stack of folded wool blankets. He stood tall, his 6'3" frame matching the officer's height, but with a different kind of presence. I believe there is a misunderstanding. I'm a paying customer finishing my laundry. I don't care what you believe, Thorne snapped, stepping closer, his hand hovering near his taser. The owner wants you gone. That means you're trespassing. Gather your trash and get out before I help you out. Marcus looked at the young officer. He saw the tension in Thorne's jaw, the dilated pupils, the aggressive stance. He recognized the signs of a man who was afraid but trying to look dangerous. Marcus kept his hands visible. He didn't raise his voice. Officer, these are not trash. These are donations for the veterans' shelter. I have my receipt right here on the cart. I have not spoken to the owner. I have broken no laws. I'm not going to ask you again, Thorne shouted. ID, now. Certainly, Marcus said. He moved his hand slowly toward his back pocket. I'm reaching for my wallet. Stop. Thorne yelled, unholstering his taser and pointing it at Marcus's chest. Keep your hands where I can see them. You just asked for my ID, son. Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice that had commanded battalions. Make up your mind. Do you want the ID or not? Don't get smart with me. Turn around. Hands on the table. I am trying to explain to you. I said, turn around. Thorne lunged forward. He grabbed Marcus's left arm, attempting to spin him around. It was a foolish move. Marcus was 62, but he was solid muscle and bone. He didn't budge. Thorne yanked harder, losing his own balance slightly. Get your hands off me, Marcus said firmly. I am not resisting, but you will not manhandle me. That's it, resisting arrest. Thorne holstered the taser and went for his cuffs. He kicked Marcus's legs apart, forcing him to bend over the table. Marcus, realizing that resisting physically would only give this officer an excuse to shoot him, complied. He lowered his upper body onto his neatly folded blankets. You are making a grave mistake, Marcus said calmly into the wool. I am a retired Sergeant Major of the United States Marine Corps. My identification is in my back pocket. I suggest you check it. Shut up, you're a Sergeant Major? Yeah, and I'm the King of England, Thorne scoffed. He cranked Marcus's arms behind his back, twisting the shoulders painfully. The handcuffs clicked shut. Thorne squeezed them tight, too tight. Check the ID, Marcus repeated. In the wallet, left pocket, the blue card. Thorne ignored him. He patted Marcus down aggressively, pulling out the wallet. He didn't open it. He just shoved it into his own pocket. We'll sort out your fake ID downtown. Right now, you're going for a ride. The other customers were on their feet now. Hey, he didn't do anything, the woman with the magazine yelled. He was just folding clothes. I've been here the whole time, the man with the laptop said, holding up his phone. I'm recording this. He never said a word to anyone. Thorne spun around, glaring at the witnesses. Back off, unless you want to go with him for obstruction. He shoved Marcus forward. Move. Marcus stumbled slightly but regained his footing. He held his head high. He didn't struggle. He didn't shout. He walked with the dignity of a prisoner of war who knows that his captors have no power over his soul. The walk to the car was a spectacle. Thorne marched Marcus out the front door, gripping his arm like a trophy. Outside, pedestrians stopped and stared. A man in a suit being led out in cuffs is one thing. An older black man in a hoodie being dragged out by a young white cop, triggers a different kind of collective memory in this country. Phones were out. People were recording from the sidewalk. "Officer, what is the charge?" a woman shouted from the curb. "Trespassing and resisting," Thorne yelled back, playing to the crowd. Marcus remained silent. He looked straight ahead. He was mentally logging everything: time of arrest, demeanor of the officer, use of force, denial of identification verification. He was building the file in his head. Thorne shoved Marcus into the back of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat was unforgiving. Marcus had to contort his body to fit his large frame and his hands painfully bound behind him. Thorne slammed the door hard. As Thorne got into the driver's seat, Marcus spoke through the partition. "Officer, my name is Marcus Holloway. I am telling you one last time. You have my wallet. Open it. Look at the blue card. If you drive this car off this lot without checking, you are ending your career." Thorne laughed. He actually laughed. He looked in the rearview mirror, his eyes full of contempt. "You guys always have a story. I'm a vet. I know the chief. I'm innocent. Save it for the judge, pop. Thorne put the car in drive and peeled away from the curb, almost clipping a cyclist. The ride to the precinct was 10 minutes long. Thorne spent it ranting. "You think you can just hang out in businesses, scare normal people? Not in my sector. We're cleaning this place up." Marcus sat in the back, closing his eyes. He focused on his breathing. He thought about the young Marines he had trained. He thought about the discipline it took to not break this boy in half. He realized that Thorne was not a warrior. He was a bully with a badge, and bullies always crumble when they face real strength. "You have the right to remain silent," Thorne finally muttered halfway to the station. "I know my rights," Marcus said softly. "Better than you do." Thorne turned up the radio to drown him out. He was feeling good. He had a collar. He had cleaned up the laundromat. He was imagining the high fives he'd get from the other guys on the shift. He had absolutely no idea that he was driving a hearse for his own career. The 12th Precinct station house was a bustle of activity. Phones ringing, officers typing reports, the smell of stale coffee and floor wax. The desk sergeant on duty was Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was 58 years old, a 35-year veteran of the force. He was old school. He believed in community policing. He believed in respect. He had a son in the Air Force. He had seen hotshot rookies come and go, and he had a low tolerance for stupidity. Thorne walked Marcus into the holding area, pushing him toward the intake desk. Marcus's wrists were bleeding slightly where the cuffs had cut him. "What do we have, Thorne?" Miller asked, looking up over his reading glasses. He saw Marcus calm upright despite the cuffs. He saw the gray hair, the bearing. Miller frowned. Something felt off. "Trespassing at the clean spin," Thorne announced proudly. "Subject refused to leave, got belligerent, resisted arrest. Had to wrestle him down." Miller looked at Marcus. "That true?" "Sergeant Marcus," said his voice level, "I would request that you ask Officer Thorne to produce my wallet. He confiscated it and refused to verify my identification." Miller looked at Thorne. "You didn't ID him. He was resisting Sarge, said he was some Marine big shot. It's probably a fake." "Give me the wallet," Miller said. His voice wasn't a request. Thorne rolled his eyes and pulled the wallet from his pocket, tossing it onto the high desk. Miller picked it up. He opened it. The first thing he saw was a standard driver's license. Marcus Holloway, clean record. The second thing he saw was the blue card. Department of Defense. Retired. Rank Sergeant Major. Miller's face went pale. He looked at the card, then he looked at Marcus. He looked at the ribbons listed on the folded piece of paper Marcus kept behind the "Idea small prayer card with his service dates. Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan, Bronze Star. Miller slowly closed the wallet. He stood up. The room went quiet. The other officers sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure. "Thorne, Miller said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Unlock these cuffs, now." "What, Sarge?" "Unlock the cuffs." Miller roared, the sound echoing off the cinder block walls. Thorne jumped. He fumbled for his keys. He walked behind Marcus and undid the restraints. Marcus brought his hands forward, rubbing his wrists. He didn't complain. He just looked at Miller and nodded. "Sergeant Major," Miller said, coming around the desk. I don't know what to say." "You can start by explaining to this officer what a DD-214 is," Marcus said. "And you can call your watch, Commander. I want to file a formal complaint." "Thorne," Miller said, turning to the young officer who was now looking confused and slightly terrified. "You arrested a sergeant major. You arrested a 30-year veteran for folding laundry. Did you verify the trespass order? Did you talk to witnesses?" The manager called. He said, "I don't give a damn what the manager said. You have eyes. Does this man look like a vagrant to you?" Miller slammed the wallet down on the desk. "You didn't check his ID because you didn't care. You saw a black man and you saw a collar." The lieutenant, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, came out of her office, drawn by the shouting. "What is going on here?" Miller handed her the wallet. "Thorne just arrested a highly decorated Marine sergeant major for folding blankets while black. No investigation. Excessive force. Refusal to verify ID." Lieutenant Jenkins looked at the ID. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Thorne. Her expression hardened into stone. "Officer Thorne," she said, "place your badge and your gun on the counter." "Lieutenant, I was just following. Badge and gun, now." "Oh. You are on administrative leave pending an immediate internal affairs investigation. Get out of my station." Thorne's hands shook as he unclipped his holster. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by the cold, sick feeling of reality crashing down. He had thought he was the predator. He had just realized he was the prey of his own stupidity. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. The video from the man with the laptop hit social media within 2 hours. It showed everything: Marcus's calm, Thorne's aggression, the refusal to look at the ID. The caption read, "Hero arrested for laundry." It was viewed 4 million times in 24 days. Kyle Vance, the owner of Clean Spin, tried to backpedal. He told the news that he felt threatened. But then the 911 tape was released. His lies about Marcus being belligerent were exposed. The community response was immediate. Protesters lined up outside Clean Spin. Regular customers boycotted. The aesthetic Kyle cared about so much was destroyed. He closed the business 3 months later and filed for bankruptcy. He was named in the civil suit for filing a false police report and defamation. Officer Derek Thorne never wore a badge again. The internal affairs investigation was scathing. It uncovered a pattern of racial profiling and excessive force that had been ignored by previous supervisors. He was fired. His name was added to a national registry of decertified officers, ensuring he couldn't just move to the next town and be a cop there. Marcus Holloway sued the city and the police department. He didn't do it for the money. He did it to force a change. The lawsuit alleged civil rights violations, false arrest assault, and negligence in hiring and training. The city attorneys took one look at Marcus's service record, the video evidence, and the witness statements, and they waved the white flag. They settled for $1.7 million. But Marcus didn't buy a yacht. He didn't move to a gated community. He took that money and he started the Holloway Foundation. He bought the building that housed the old Clean Spin Laundromat. He reopened it. But this time it was a non-profit. Free laundry for veterans, for the homeless, for single mothers struggling to get by. He hired at-risk youth to run it, giving them jobs and mentorship. On the day the settlement was announced, the chief of police stood at a podium with Marcus standing next to him. The chief apologized publicly and humbly. Marcus took the microphone. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He spoke with the quiet power of a man who knows the cost of freedom. "A uniform," Marcus said, looking at the cameras, "is a heavy thing to wear. Whether it is Marine Corps green or police blue, it represents a promise to protect, a promise to serve. When you use that uniform to bully, to assume, to hate, you don't just disgrace yourself. You disgrace every man and woman who has ever died wearing it. Officer Thorne saw a black man in a hoodie and thought he saw a criminal. He didn't look close enough to see the man. And that is the tragedy. Not just for me, but for all the young men who don't have a sergeant major's ID in their pocket. Who will speak for them? The room was silent. That is the question we are left with today. Marcus Holloway had the rank, the history, and the poise to survive that encounter and turn it into justice. But what about the others? What about the people who are judged, handcuffed, and humiliated simply because they don't fit the aesthetic? Justice cost the city $1.7 million, but the dignity of a human being is priceless. What do you think? Should officers be required to carry personal liability insurance for misconduct like this? And should there be stricter penalties for business owners who weaponize the police against customers? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, if you believe in justice for our veterans and accountability for our police, please hit that like button and subscribe. We will keep telling these stories until we don't have to anymore. Stay safe, look out for each other, and never judge a book by its cover. Aujourd'hui, terror soldier.
Get your hands out of your pockets. Step away from the counter. Now.
Officer, I'm waiting for my prescription. I haven't done anything wrong.
We got a call about a disturbance. That's you. Drop the cane and put your hands behind
It's
your back.
not a weapon. It's a medical device. I can't stand
I
without
said
it.
drop it.
You are making a mistake you're going to regret for the rest of your life.
Look, officer.
Get your hands out of your pockets. Excuse me, I said get your hands out of your pockets and step away from the counter. Officer, I'm waiting for my prescription. I don't care what you're waiting for. We've got a report of a suspicious individual causing a disturbance. That's you. I haven't said a word to anyone. I'm just standing here. You're making people nervous. Drop the cane and put your hands behind your back. It's not a prop, son. It's a medical device. I can't stand without it. I said, drop it. You are making a mistake that you are going to regret for the rest of your life. Officer Kyle Vance had been patrolling the streets of Oak Creek for 6 years. He was 29 years old, ambitious, and possessed a dangerous combination of arrogance and authority. He walked into that pharmacy believing he was about to take down a drug addict or a thief. He was convinced that his badge gave him the final say in every situation. But he was wrong. The man he was barking orders at wasn't a criminal. He was Marcus Thorne, a 52-year-old retired Army Ranger, a recipient of the Purple Heart, and a man who had given more to his country than Officer Vance could ever comprehend. What Vance did next, kicking a disabled veteran's cane out from under him and dragging him out in handcuffs over a bottle of pain medication, would cost the town of Oak Creek $980,000. It would strip Vance of his badge, his pension, and his reputation. Before we get into the details of this miscarriage of justice, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that our veterans deserve respect and that badges should represent protection, not persecution, please hit that subscribe button. We bring you these stories because the truth matters, and accountability only happens when good people pay attention. The Oak Creek Pharmacy is a staple in this quiet, mid-sized town. It sits on Elm Street right across from the library. It's the kind of place where the pharmacists usually know your name and ask about your grandkids. It was 10:15 a.m. on a Wednesday in October. The autumn sun was bright, casting long shadows through the glass doors. Inside, it was quiet. The smell of antiseptic and floor wax hung in the air. There were only 3 other customers in the store. A young mother buying diapers, an elderly man checking his blood pressure at the machine, and Marcus Thorne. Thorne had been living in Oak Creek for 15 years. He kept to himself mostly. At 52, he moved with the stiffness of a man 20 years his senior, a legacy of a roadside bomb in Afghanistan that had shattered his right leg and left him with permanent nerve damage. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for relief. His doctor had called in his refill for hydrocodone 2 days prior, a medication strictly controlled and absolutely necessary for Thorne to manage the chronic pain that flared up when the weather turned cold. Thorne stood near the consultation window, leaning heavily on his cane. It was a sturdy, black aluminum model with an ergonomic grip. He wore a faded gray hoodie, loose-fitting track pants to accommodate the swelling in his knee, and a baseball cap pulled low. To the casual observer, he might have looked unkempt. To anyone paying attention, he looked like a man in pain. He had been waiting for 20 minutes. The pharmacy tech, a young woman who was new and clearly overwhelmed, had told him there was an issue with the insurance authorization. "Just a few more minutes, Mr. Thorne," she'd said. He nodded, shifting his weight to his good leg. He didn't complain. He didn't raise his voice. He had learned patience in the Hindu Kush mountains, lying still for hours waiting for a target. Waiting for a pill bottle was nothing compared to that. But his silence, his hoodie, and his physical discomfort were being watched by a pair of eyes that saw only a threat. Brad Sterling was the new store manager. At 32, Sterling was a man who desperately wanted to be important. He had transferred from a branch in a larger city 3 weeks ago and brought with him a profound suspicion of anyone who didn't fit his image of a good customer. He stood in the elevated manager's booth watching Thorne through the gaps in the merchandise displays. He saw a black man in a hoodie. He saw the pacing Thorne had to move every few minutes to keep his leg from seizing up and interpreted it as casing the joint. He saw Thorne check his watch and interpreted it as impatience or nervousness. In Sterling's mind, a narrative began to form. This wasn't a patient waiting for medicine. This was an addict looking for a fix, or worse, a robber waiting for the store to clear out. Sterling didn't check with the pharmacy tech. He didn't walk over and ask, "Can I help you, sir?" He let his bias fill in the blanks. Sterling watched for another 5 minutes. When Thorne reached into his pocket to pull out his phone and check a text message from his wife, Sterling flinched. He picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency line, but his voice carried the urgency of a bank robbery. "This is Brad Sterling, manager at Oak Creek Pharmacy. I need a unit here. We have a suspicious male, possibly intoxicated, loitering near the pharmacy counter. He's been here nearly half an hour, pacing, acting erratic. He's making my staff uncomfortable." The dispatcher asked the standard questions. "Is he armed? Has he made threats?" Sterling hesitated, then exaggerated to ensure a quicker response. "He's got his hand in his pocket like he might have something. He's agitated. I'd like him removed before he does something." The call was logged. A suspicious person call in a quiet town on a Wednesday morning. It was the kind of call that gives an aggressive officer exactly the excuse he needs to flex his muscles. Do you think managers who make false reports based on appearance should face legal penalties? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Officer Kyle Vance was 3 blocks away when the call came over the radio. Vance was not well liked within the department, though his arrest numbers were high. In his 6 years on the force, he had accumulated 9 complaints. Most were for discourtesy, 2 for excessive force. The internal affairs files painted a picture of an officer who escalated situations rather than de-escalated them. He was a man who saw respect as something to be demanded, not earned. The union had successfully argued down the previous complaints to training opportunities, or unsubstantiated, keeping Vance on the street. But the pattern was undeniable. Vance believed that policing was about dominance. When he heard "suspicious male" and "agitated" at the pharmacy, his adrenaline spiked. He didn't think about community policing. He thought about control. Vance pulled his cruiser into the pharmacy lot, parking diagonally across 2 handicap spaces right in front of the doors. It was a power move he often used, establishing that he could go where others couldn't. He adjusted his belt, checked his body camera to ensure it was on a department requirement he couldn't bypass, and walked briskly toward the entrance. He entered the store with his chest out, his hand resting on the grip of his taser, though not yet drawing it. He scanned the store. He ignored the mother with the baby. He ignored the old man. His eyes locked onto Marcus Thorne. Thorne was leaning against the counter, looking down at his phone. He looked tired. To Vance, he looked like a suspect. Vance didn't stop to talk to Brad Sterling. He didn't ask the pharmacist what was happening. He walked straight up to Thorne, invading his personal space immediately. "Hey, you, step away from the counter." Thorne looked up, startled. He saw the uniform, the badge, the aggressive stance. He slowly put his phone in his pocket. "Excuse me." Vance moved closer. "I said step away from the counter. We got a call about a disturbance." Thorne didn't move. He couldn't move quickly even if he wanted to. "There's no disturbance, officer. I'm waiting for my medication. The pharmacist is sorting out the insurance." Vance scoffed. "Yeah, I bet. What kind of medication? Oxy, Perks?" Thorne straightened his spine as much as he could, wincing slightly. "That is my private medical information, but I am picking up a prescription legally prescribed by my doctor at the VA hospital." Vance narrowed his eyes. The mention of the VA didn't register as veteran to him. It registered as an excuse he'd heard from vagrants before. "Let me see some ID." Thorne shifted his weight to his cane so he could reach for his wallet. "I have my driver's license and my VA identification card right here." He moved his hand slowly toward his back pocket. "Don't reach!" Vance barked, his hand dropping to his holster. Thorne froze. "Officer, I am getting my ID, which you just asked for. Do it slowly." Thorne used 2 fingers to pull out his wallet. He opened it and presented his Veterans Affairs ID card, which clearly displayed his photo, his branch of service Army, and his status. Vance barely glanced at it. In his mind, the decision had already been made. "This looks fake. Anyone can print these off the internet." Thorne blinked, disbelief washing over him. "Fake. That is a federal government ID. You can call the precinct and have them verify it. Look at the hologram." Vance slapped the wallet out of Thorne's hand. It hit the floor with a soft thud. "I'm not playing games with you. The manager wants you gone. You're loitering, you're disturbing the peace, and I'm suspecting you're under the influence. Turn around." The pharmacy had gone deadly silent. The pharmacist, an older man named Mr. Henderson, who had just returned from his break, stepped out from the back. Officer, wait. Mr. Thorne is a regular customer. We're just filling his—" "Stay back," Vance yelled, pointing a finger at the pharmacist. "Do not interfere with a police investigation. I'll get to you in a minute." He turned back to Thorne. "I told you to turn around." Thorne remained facing him. "I am not turning around. I have committed no crime. I am a disabled veteran buying medicine. I have the receipt for the copay in my pocket. You are violating my civil rights." Vance's face turned red. He wasn't used to people knowing the law, and he certainly wasn't used to a black man in a hoodie speaking to him with such calm authority. "Last warning. Turn around or I will make you turn around." Thorne planted his cane firmly on the floor. "I cannot turn around without stability. My leg is injured. If you force me, I will fall." This is the moment where training is supposed to kick in, where humanity is supposed to override ego. But for Officer Vance Thorne's refusal was a direct challenge to his manhood. He didn't see a disabled man. He saw defiance. "Have it your way," Vance muttered. He stepped forward and, in a move that would be replayed on national news for months, he kicked the bottom of Thorne's cane. The cane clattered across the linoleum floor. Thorne gasped, his right leg buckling under the sudden weight. He grabbed the counter to keep from collapsing, pain shooting through his damaged nerves like lightning. "Get on the ground," Vance shouted, grabbing Thorne by the shoulder and forcing him downward. Thorne groaned. "My leg. You're breaking my leg." "Stop resisting," Vance yelled, using the phrase that bad officers use to justify unnecessary force. He shoved Thorne onto his stomach. The customers were screaming now. "He didn't do anything," the young mother yelled, holding up her phone. "He's crippled, you idiot," the elderly man shouted. Vance ignored them. He jammed his knee into the small of Thorne's back right over an old shrapnel scar. He grabbed Thorne's wrists and wrenched them behind his back. Thorne gritted his teeth, refusing to give Vance the satisfaction of a scream, though tears of pain leaked from his eyes. The handcuffs clicked shut, tight. "You are under arrest for disorderly conduct, loitering, and resisting arrest." Vance panted, sweat beading on his forehead. He hauled Thorne up. Without his cane, Thorne was dead weight. "Walk," Vance commanded. I can't," Thorne gritted out. "I need my cane." "You can walk fine to the car," Vance said, dragging him. He didn't retrieve the cane. He left it lying in the middle of the aisle, a silent testament to his cruelty. Mr. Henderson, the pharmacist, ran around the counter. "You can't take him. He needs his medication. He's a war hero, for God's sake." Vance paused at the door, looking back with a sneer. "He's a junkie causing a scene. If you want to file a complaint, come to the station. Otherwise, shut up." He pushed Thorne through the automatic doors. Outside, the cool air hit Thorne's sweating face. He was humiliated, paraded through the parking lot like a criminal, limping, dragging his bad leg while people watched from their cars. But inside, beneath the pain and the shame, a cold resolve was forming. Thorne had survived the Taliban. He had survived the long, lonely recovery at Walter Reed. He would survive Officer Kyle Vance. And he would make sure this man never wore a badge again. The drive to the precinct was short, only about 10 minutes. Thorne sat in the back of the cruiser, twisted at an awkward angle because of the handcuffs and his stiff leg. He closed his eyes and focused on his breathing, a technique he'd learned in pain management therapy. He didn't speak to Vance. He didn't beg. He mentally cataloged every second. The time of arrest. The refusal to look at ID. The assault, because that's what kicking the cane was. The denial of medical equipment. Vance glanced at him in the rearview mirror, perhaps expecting cursing or pleading. The silence unnerved him. "Quiet now, huh?" Vance taunted. "Not so tough without your little audience." Thorne opened his eyes and met Vance's gaze in the mirror. "I have nothing to say to you, officer. I'll save it for your superiors." Vance laughed, but it sounded hollow. They arrived at the Oak Creek Police Department. Vance pulled Thorne out of the car again, forcing him to walk without support. They entered the booking area. The desk sergeant on duty was Thomas Miller. Miller was 58, a relic of the old school nearing retirement. He was a Marine Corps veteran who had served in the Gulf War. He knew the town, he knew the people, and he knew a bad arrest when he saw one. He looked up from his paperwork as Vance dragged Thorne in. Miller's eyes went immediately to Thorne's dragging right leg, then to the handcuffs, then to Vance's flushed face. "Vance, what in the hell is this?" Miller asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Disorderly at the pharmacy, refused to leave, resisted arrest, possibly high on narcotics," Vance recited, puffing his chest out. Miller stood up and walked around the desk. He looked at Thorne. He saw the gray hoodie, yes, but he also saw the bearing, the way Thorne held his head up despite the pain. And he saw the scar running down the side of Thorne's neck, a faint line that only another soldier would recognize as a close call. "Sir," Miller said to Thorne, ignoring Vance, "are you injured?" "I am a disabled veteran sergeant," Thorne said, his voice steady. "This officer kicked my cane away and forced me to walk on a reconstructed leg. I am in extreme pain." Miller's head snapped toward Vance. "You did what?" "He was using it as a weapon. I secured the scene," Vance defended weakly. Miller looked back at Thorne. "What were you doing at the pharmacy?" "Picking up my hydrocodone prescription. My ID is in my wallet, which the officer threw on the floor at the store, but I have my dog tags." Thorne nodded toward his chest. Miller reached out and gently pulled the chain from under Thorne's hoodie. The tags jingled. Miller read them. Thorne Marcus. Oppose. Ranger. U.S. Army. Miller's face went pale, then red with a fury that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. He looked at the paperwork Vance had slapped on the counter. "You arrested a ranger," Miller whispered, "for buying medicine." "He didn't show ID," Vance lied. "He showed a VA card," Thorne corrected. "The officer called it fake." Miller turned to Vance. The look in his eyes was terrifying. "Uncuff him." Vance blinked. "Sarge, I have to process." "Uncuff him right now, Vance, or so help me. God, I will rip that badge off your chest myself." Vance's hands shook as he unlocked the cuffs. Thorne rubbed his wrists, deep red grooves left in his dark skin. Miller grabbed a chair and shoved it under Thorne. "Sit down, sir. I am calling an ambulance for your leg." "I don't need an ambulance, Sergeant," Thorne said. "I need my medication, and I need to file a formal report against this man." Miller nodded slowly. "You'll do both. Vance, get in the captain's office. Now." "But the captain isn't in." "Then you sit in there and you wait for him, and you leave your gun and your badge on my desk." Vance looked around the room. Other officers had stopped what they were doing. They were looking at Thorne's leg. They were looking at the dog tags. They were looking at Vance with disgust. The blue wall of silence does not protect you when you violate the sacred code of respecting those who served. Vance unbuckled his belt. The heavy thud of the equipment hitting the desk sounded like a gavel coming down. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the city administration. By the time Thorne was driven back to the pharmacy by the captain himself to retrieve his cane and medication, the video from the young mother's phone was already on Facebook. It had 10,000 shares in 2 hours. Local hero assaulted by police. Veteran's cane kicked away. The visual of a uniformed officer kicking a cane out from under a crippled black man was indefensible. It was visceral. It was cruel. It stripped away any argument of compliance or confusion. It showed malice. Brad Sterling, the manager, tried to backpedal. When the local news crew showed up at the pharmacy an hour later, he refused to come out of his office. Corporate headquarters fired him by 5:00 p.m. that same day. His statement about feeling threatened by a man leaning on a cane crumbled under the weight of the video evidence and the witness testimonies of the pharmacist and the other customers. Sterling was blacklisted from the retail industry, his career over at 32. But the real legal storm was directed at Officer Vance and the Oak Creek Police Department. Thorne contacted a civil rights attorney who specialized in ADA Americans with Disabilities Act violations. The lawsuit was filed the following week. It accused Vance of excessive force false arrest racial profiling and a gross violation of the ADA for denying a disabled person their assistive device. The city attorney took one look at the video read Sergeant Miller's scathing internal report and told the mayor, "We cannot go to trial. We will lose, and the jury will give him $10 million. The settlement negotiations were short. The city agreed to pay Marcus Thorne $980,000. It was a massive sum for a town the size of Oak Creek, enough to impact the budget for road repairs and parks for a year. But the money was only part of the equation. Thorne demanded and got a public apology from the chief of police. He demanded that Kyle Vance be decertified, meaning his name was added to a national registry that would prevent him from ever working as a police officer in any state again. Vance was fired with cause. He lost his pension. He lost his career. At 29, he was back at square one, permanently marked as the man who abused a veteran. Marcus Thorne used a portion of the settlement money to start a local advocacy group for disabled veterans, helping them navigate the complexities of the VA and local law enforcement interactions. He still goes to the Oak Creek Pharmacy, where Mr. Henderson personally ensures his medication is ready the moment he walks in. The new manager greets him by name, but Thorne still walks with a bit more pain than he did before that day. The physical injury from the fall healed, but the memory of the humiliation lingers. This story forces us to ask a difficult question. How many Officer Vances are out there patrolling our streets, unable to distinguish between a threat and a citizen in need? How many managers like Brad Sterling are allowed to weaponize the police against people who don't fit the look? Marcus Thorne had the strength, the history, and the evidence to fight back. But what about the teenager with a disability? What about the elderly woman with no camera phone? Justice was served here, but it carried a heavy price tag, nearly $1 million of taxpayer money, and the dignity of a man who had already sacrificed his body for his country. We need to demand better. We need to demand that protect and serve applies to everyone regardless of what they wear or how they walk. We need to ensure that a badge is never a shield for bigotry. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, use that emotion. Share this video. Talk about it. Because the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to say nothing. What do you think should happen to officers who ignore medical IDs, and should the manager have faced criminal charges for the false report? Let me know in the comments below. Your voice helps us keep this channel growing and the truth coming to light. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for each other.
Drop the bag! Drop it now or you're going to the ground!
Officer, it's 70 pounds of copper. If I drop it, I break my foot. I'm setting it down slowly.
Don't tell me what to do! Step back! Hands up!
My hands are visible. I am not resisting.
You're escalating nothing. You're trespassing. Turn around now!
The command tore through the humid morning air, shattering the industrial hum of the municipal recycling center. Elias Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't drop the bag of copper piping he was holding either. He simply tightened his grip, turned slowly with the calculated precision of a man who had survived 3 decades of military service, and looked down the barrel of the situation. He was just recycling scrap metal from a rental property he owned. But to the young officer screaming at him, he was a threat that needed to be neutralized. "I said drop it!" Officer Kyle Vance shouted again, his hand hovering aggressively over his holstered sidearm, his other hand pointing a taser directly at Elias's chest. "I hear you, officer," Elias said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that carried the weight of command. "But if I drop this bag, 70 pounds of copper pipe is going to smash my toes. I'm going to set it down, slowly. Don't you tell me what you're going to do." Vance stepped closer, invading the personal space that Elias had spent a lifetime defending. Officer Kyle Vance was 29 years old with 4 years on the force and a reputation that preceded him, though not the kind of reputation a good cop wants. He was known in the precinct locker room as a hothead, the kind of guy who viewed every interaction with the public as a combat scenario where he had to be the victor. He had accumulated 9 complaints in 48 months. 5 for verbal abuse, 3 for excessive force, and 1 for profiling. Every single one had been dismissed or buried by a union rep who knew how to work the system. Vance believed he was the thin blue line. In reality, he was a liability waiting to explode. Standing opposite him was Elias Thorne. At 58 years old, Elias was built like a brick retaining wall. He stood 6'2" with broad shoulders that hadn't slumped an inch since his retirement. He was a retired Army Master Sergeant, a rank earned through blood sweat and the distinct ability to lead men into hell and bring them back. He had a Silver Star from an operation in Panama back in '89, a Purple Heart from the Gulf and knees that had been reconstructed more times than he cared to count. He was a man of absolute discipline. He paid his taxes early, he flew the flag on holidays, and he respected the law. But he also knew the difference between lawful authority and a bully with a badge. "I am setting this down," Elias repeated, his eyes locking onto Vance's with an intensity that would have made a private wet himself. He bent his knees, slightly ignoring the sharp sting of old shrapnel wounds, and lowered the canvas bag to the concrete. "There, it's down. Now what seems to be the problem, son?" "Don't call me son." Vance snapped his face, flushing a dangerous shade of red. "Step away from the bag. Keep your hands where I can see them." Elias straightened up, dusting his hands on his work pants. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt, paint-splattered cargo pants, and heavy work boots. He looked like a laborer. He looked like a scrapper. To Officer Vance, he looked like a criminal. "I'm stepping back," Elias said, taking one measured step. "I have my ID in my back pocket. I have the permit for this drop-off in the truck. I'm renovating my duplex on Elm Street. Everything here is above board." "I decide what's above board," Vance spat back. "We got a call about a suspicious individual stealing city property. You fit the description." "Stealing?" Elias let out a short, dry chuckle. "I'm bringing metal in, officer, not taking it out. That's how recycling works." "You got a smart mouth," Vance said, unholstering his taser completely, now the red laser dot dancing on Elias's chest. "I don't like smart mouths." Elias's demeanor shifted. The casual contractor vanished, replaced instantly by the master sergeant. His posture stiffened, his chin lifted. "And I don't like having a weapon pointed at me when I haven't committed a crime. You need to lower that weapon and check my credentials." "You don't give orders here," Vance screamed, his voice cracking. He was losing control, and in his mind there was only one way to get it back: dominance. The municipal recycling center on the east side of town was a sprawling lot of concrete and sorted piles of refuse. It was a place of rules and order, which was exactly why Elias Thorne liked it. You had the glass bin, the cardboard compactor, and the high-value metal cages. Elias had been coming here for 20 years. He knew the flow. He knew the schedule. But he didn't know Brad Miller. Brad Miller was 34 years old and had been the site manager for exactly 6 months. He was a man of small power and large insecurities. He spent most of his days in the air-conditioned portable office, watching the security feeds and looking for reasons to assert his authority. Brad was the type of man who measured his self-worth by how many people he could tell no in a single day. That Tuesday morning, the sun was bright, casting long, sharp shadows across the yard. Elias had arrived at 10:15 a.m., backing his Ford F-150 into the designated unloading zone. He had spent the last week tearing out the old plumbing from his rental property, a duplex he had bought as an investment for his retirement. He had stripped the copper, cleaned it, and bagged it. He had his resident access card. He had his contractor's license. He had done everything right. From his office window, Brad Miller watched the black Ford truck back in. He saw a large black man get out. He saw the work clothes. He saw the heavy bags. In Brad's mind, the equation was simple. Black man plus old truck plus copper wire equals crackhead scrapper. He didn't bother to check the computer to see if Elias had scanned his resident card at the gate. He didn't bother to walk out and ask the man if he needed assistance. Brad had been reading online forums about scrappers hitting municipal yards, stealing metal out of the bins to resell at private yards for cash. He convinced himself in the span of 30 seconds that Elias wasn't unloading. He was scouting. Or maybe he was unloading garbage into the metal bin to hide theft. It didn't matter what the logic was. Brad just wanted him gone. He watched Elias heft a heavy bag of copper. "Look at that," Brad muttered to himself. "Probably stripped that out of a foreclosed house. Not on my watch." Brad picked up the phone. He didn't dial the non-emergency line, which was the protocol for a suspicion check. He dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? "Yeah, this is Brad Miller, manager at the Municipal Recycling Center on Industrial Way. I've got a guy here trespassing. He's looting the metal bins." "Is he armed, sir?" the dispatcher asked. Brad hesitated. He looked at Elias, who was currently wiping sweat from his forehead with a rag. Elias had a utility knife clipped to his belt, a standard tool for any contractor. "Yeah," Brad lied, his voice dropping to a whisper to sound more afraid. "He's got a knife on his belt. And he's acting aggressive. He's big. He's making my staff uncomfortable. I need an officer here now. We have a unit in the area. Officers are en route. Stay inside and do not approach the suspect." Brad hung up the phone with a smug smile. He liked the excitement. He liked being the one who called in the cavalry. He adjusted his polo shirt, grabbed his clipboard, his shield of authority, and walked out onto the loading dock to watch the show. He stood about 50 feet away, leaning against a railing waiting for the police to arrive and do his dirty work. He watched Elias sorting the pipes, separating the brass fittings from the copper, meticulous and slow. Brad didn't see a disciplined worker. He saw a man who didn't belong in his clean, organized yard. "Enjoy it while you can, buddy," Brad whispered. When Officer Vance's cruiser screeched into the lot 5 minutes later, skipping the check-in gate entirely, Brad felt a surge of validation. He pointed silently toward Elias, like a Roman emperor condemning a gladiator. He didn't need to speak. The finger point said it all. "That's the bad guy. Get him." Officer Kyle Vance slammed his cruiser door shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot across the concrete yard. He didn't look at the manager, Brad Miller. He didn't stop to ask for details. He didn't assess the scene for actual danger. His adrenaline was already redlining because the dispatch had said armed subject and looting. Vance saw the target. Elias was the only black man in the yard. In Vance's tunnel vision, that was all the confirmation he needed. He bypassed 2 white men who were unloading a trailer of landscaping debris and marched straight toward the figure by the black truck. Elias had just lifted the last bag when he heard the shout. He saw the officer approaching, not walking but storming. Elias knew body language. He had trained thousands of soldiers to read it. He saw the clenched fists, the forward-leaning gait, the eyes wide with a mixture of fear and aggression. This boy wasn't here to talk. He was here to fight. "You step away from the vehicle," Vance had hollered initially. Elias had turned calm. "Morning, officer. Something I can help you with." That was when Vance had drawn the taser. Now, standing 5 feet apart, the standoff was deteriorating rapidly. "I asked you for ID," Vance barked, though he hadn't actually asked. He had demanded compliance without context. "And I want to know why you're stealing city property." "I'm not stealing," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming slower, more enunciated. He spoke to Vance the way one speaks to a spooked horse. "I am a resident of this county. I own property at 405 Elm. I am depositing copper piping from a renovation. I have the receipt for the dump fee in my dashboard." "I don't care about your dashboard." Vance stepped sideways, trying to flank Elias, acting out a tactical maneuver he'd probably seen in a movie. "The manager says you're looting. You have a weapon. I see the knife." Elias glanced down at the yellow DeWalt box cutter clipped to his pocket. "It's a box cutter. I'm a contractor." "It's a weapon, hands on your head now." "Officer," Elias said. "I am a retired Master Sergeant of the United States Army. I am not a threat to you. If I reach for my head, I have to drop my arms first. If I reach for my wallet, I have to move my hands. You need to tell me exactly how you want me to move so you don't do something stupid." Vance bristled at the correction. He hated being told what to do, especially by a suspect. "You think you're tough. You think being a vet makes you special. I think it makes me disciplined," Elias countered. "Something you seem to be lacking." That was the breaking point. Vance's ego couldn't take the hit. He holstered the taser and reached for his handcuffs. "That's it. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and trespassing." "Trespassing?" Elias shook his head in disbelief. "I paid to be here." "Not anymore. Turn around." "I am showing you my hands," Elias said, holding them out, palms open. "I am not resisting. But you are making a mistake that is going to cost you more than you can afford, son." Vance lunged. He didn't wait for Elias to turn. He grabbed Elias's left wrist and yanked it. Elias didn't pull back. He let the officer take the arm, his muscles loose. He knew that tensing up would be cited as resisting arrest in the report. He had to be perfect. He had to be better than the man assaulting him. "I am complying," Elias said loudly, his voice booming for the witnesses. "I am complying." Vance twisted the arm behind Elias's back, leveraging it upward. Stop resisting. Stop fighting me. Vance screamed for the benefit of the body camera, creating a false audio narrative that contradicted the video reality. I am not fighting, Elias said through gritted teeth. Watch the shoulder. I have a rotator cuff injury from service. Vance didn't care. He pushed the arm higher. The pain in Elias's shoulder was white hot, a familiar agony that transported him back to a Humvee rollover in Kandahar. But he didn't scream. He breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Get on the ground, Vance shouted, trying to trip Elias with a leg sweep. Elias stumbled but stayed upright. I can't, he grunted. My knees. I have titanium in both knees. I cannot kneel. I said get on the ground. Vance kicked at the back of Elias's leg, a sloppy, aggressive strike that bruised the calf but failed to buckle the veteran's stance. Officer! Elias barked, the command voice finally breaking free. It was the voice that had directed fire under ambush, the voice that had kept 19-year-old kids from panicking when the mortars fell. I am physically disabled. I cannot kneel. If you force me down, you will break my legs. Do you understand? For a split second, Vance hesitated. The authority in that voice was undeniable. It wasn't the pleading of a criminal. It was the order of a superior. But Brad Miller was watching. The other recyclers were watching. Vance couldn't back down now. He felt the eyes of the crowd on him, and his insecurity curdled into rage. I don't care about your legs, Vance shouted. You refuse to comply. I will light you up. He reached for the taser again. Do not tase me, Elias shouted. I have a pacemaker. This was a lie. His heart was fine, but he knew he had to escalate the perceived risk to stop this kid from electrocuting him. He had to think strategically. Vance holstered the taser and went back to physical force. He jumped on Elias's back, wrapping an arm around his neck in a sloppy headlock, trying to drag the 240-pound man to the pavement. Elias stood like a statue. He could have flipped Vance. He could have broken the boy's wrist in 3 places with a simple Krav Maga maneuver he'd taught for a decade. But he knew that if he touched a hair on this officer's head, he would be shot. He would be just another dead black man, and the headline would read, Officer kills violent suspect in struggle. So Elias took the abuse. He let Vance hang on him. He let Vance scratch his neck. He let Vance kick his ankles. I am not resisting, Elias repeated like a mantra. I am standing still. By now a crowd had gathered. 2 men in neon vests, city workers, had stopped their truck. A woman in a minivan had her phone out filming. Hey, the woman yelled. He's not doing anything. Leave him alone. Back up! Vance screamed at the crowd, breathless and sweating his cap askew. Interference with an arrest is a felony. Realizing he couldn't drag Elias down, Vance resorted to brute force on the arms. He wrenched Elias's right arm back, forcing the wrists together. The angle was unnatural. Elias felt something pop in his shoulder. He bit his lip so hard he tasted copper fitting, he thought grimly. Vance slapped the handcuffs on. He ratcheted them tight. Click, click, click. Then he squeezed them 1 notch tighter, just for spite. The metal bit into the ulnar nerve. You got him, Brad Miller called out from the loading dock, walking closer now that the threat was restrained. Good job, officer. He was terrifying my staff. Elias turned his head to look at Miller. You're a liar, Elias said calmly. And you're a coward. Vance shoved Elias forward, pushing him toward the cruiser. Shut up. You have the right to remain silent. I know my rights, Elias said. Better than you do. I want a supervisor on the scene. You'll get nothing until we get to the station, Vance sneered. Walk. The walk to the patrol car was the longest 100 yards of Elias Thorne's life. It wasn't the pain in his shoulder or the throbbing in his knees that bothered him. It was the indignity. He had worn the uniform of his country for 30 years. He had represented the United States in Germany and Korea, in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had been saluted by generals. He had shaken the hand of the president. And now he was being frog-marched through a garbage dump by a boy who hadn't been born when Elias earned his first stripe, all because he was recycling while black. The bystanders were loud now. "Get his badge number," someone shouted. "I got it," the woman with the phone yelled. "Officer Vance, I got it all on video. He didn't do anything." Elias stopped walking. Vance shoved him, but Elias planted his feet. He turned toward the woman filming. "Ma'am," Elias projected his voice. "My name is Master Sergeant Elias Thorne, U.S. Army retired. I am being arrested for recycling my own property. Please make sure that video is saved." "Shut your mouth." Vance grabbed Elias by the back of the neck and forced his head down. "Stop grandstanding stolen valor-looking piece of trash." Stolen valor. The words hit Elias harder than a bullet. To accuse a man who had left pieces of his soul in the desert of faking his service, that was the ultimate insult. "You better pray you're right," Elias whispered, "because if you're wrong, God help you." Vance opened the back door of the cruiser and shoved Elias inside. It was a tight fit. Elias had to contort his bad knees to get in. Vance didn't help. He slammed the door on Elias's ankle before Elias could pull it in, then reopened it and slammed it again properly, not even apologizing for the crush. Elias sat in the hard plastic seat, the cage separating him from the air conditioning. He looked out the window. He saw his truck, the driver's door, still unlocked, his keys, likely still in the ignition or his pocket. He saw his bags of copper sitting on the ground. "My truck," Elias said as Vance got in the front. "You can't leave my truck unlocked with my tools in it." "Not my problem," Vance said, checking his reflection in the rearview mirror to fix his hair. "Maybe your buddy the manager will watch it for you." Vance started the engine and peeled out of the recycling center, hitting the siren for a split second, just to assert dominance as he exited the gate. Brad Miller stood on the dock arms, crossed, watching them leave. He felt a moment of triumph. The problem was gone. The yard was pure again. He turned to his employee. "Toss those bags in the city bin. If he comes back, he can fish them out." In the back of the cruiser, Elias closed his eyes. He began to compartmentalize. He put the pain in a box. He put the anger in a box. He focused on the mission. The mission now was documentation and survival. He memorized the time, 10:42 a.m. He memorized the route. He memorized the officer's name, K. Vance badge number 492. He wasn't a prisoner. He was an operative behind enemy lines, and he was gathering intelligence. The drive to the 4th Precinct took 20 minutes. Vance spent the entire time lecturing Elias. "You guys always have to make it difficult," Vance said, glancing back through the partition. "If you'd just shown me ID when I asked, we wouldn't be here. It's about respect. You gotta learn to respect the badge." Elias said nothing. He stared out the window, watching the city pass by. He had fought for the freedom of people to speak, even idiots. He exercised his right to remain silent. When they pulled into the precinct, Sally Port, Vance yanked Elias out of the car. "Let's go. Booking is this way." They walked into the station, past the front desk, and into the processing area. The air smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Behind the high desk sat Lieutenant Frank Higgins. Higgins was 55, a thick-necked man with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen everything. He was the watch commander. He looked up from his paperwork as Vance dragged Elias in. Higgins frowned. He didn't look at Vance. He looked at the prisoner. He saw the boots. He saw the cargo pants. But mostly he saw the way the man held his head. He saw the eyes, alert, calm, furious, but controlled. Higgins had served in the First Gulf War. He knew the look. "What do we have here, Vance?" Higgins asked, his voice low. "Disorderly, trespassing, resisting." Vance rattled off, dumping Elias's wallet and keys on the counter.
"Guy was looting the recycling center, refused to ID, tried to fight me." "I did not fight," Elias said,
His voice was calm, but it filled the room. And I did not refuse. I attempted to comply, and this officer assaulted me. Quiet! Vance slapped the counter. Higgins stood up slowly. Vance, zip it. Higgins walked around the desk. He looked at Elias's wrists, seeing the dark purple swelling around the handcuffs. He looked at the way Elias was favoring his left knee. Then he looked at the wallet Vance had thrown. It had flipped open. In the clear plastic window, it wasn't a driver's license. It was a CAC card, a common access card, a Department of Defense identification. And next to it, tucked into the leather, was a blue retiree ID card with the rank MSG-E8. Higgins picked up the wallet. He looked at the ID. He looked at Elias. Master Sergeant, Higgins asked. Retired, Elias replied. 3rd Infantry Division. Currently a civilian contractor for DoD Logistics. Higgins felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at Vance, who was smirking, oblivious to the nuclear bomb he had just detonated. Vance! Higgins said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. Uncuff this man. What loot? He's a suspect. We have to process. I said take the damn cuffs off, Higgins roared, the sound echoing off the cinderblock walls. Right now. Vance jumped, startled. He fumbled for his keys. I don't understand. You arrested a master sergeant with a silver star, Higgins said, reading the folded DD-214 card Elias kept behind his license, a habit of old soldiers who wanted to be ready for the VA. You arrested a disabled veteran for... What, recycling? Vance got the cuffs off. Elias rubbed his wrists. The skin was broken. Blood trickled down his thumb. I need a medic, Elias said coldly. And I need my lawyer. And I need this officer's badge number recorded in the log. Higgins looked at Elias. Sergeant, I am. I cannot tell you how sorry I am. This is a mistake. We can fix this right here. I'll drive you back to your truck myself. Elias looked at Higgins. There was no soldierly camaraderie in his eyes anymore, just the cold distance of a man who had been betrayed by the country he loved. No, Lieutenant. We cannot fix this here. You can't unring a bell, and you can't unarrest a man for being black in public. Elias pointed at Vance. That boy didn't see a sergeant. He saw a thug. And until you fix that, you haven't fixed anything. Elias Thorne was released 20 minutes later, but he didn't leave the station quietly. He walked out the front door where his lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Jenkins, was already waiting. She had been called by Elias's wife, who had tracked his phone to the precinct when he didn't come home for lunch. By 6 p.m., the video was online. The woman at the recycling center hadn't just recorded it. She had uploaded it to TikTok and Twitter with the caption, Racist Cop Assaults Retired Army Vet at Recycling Center. The video was damning. It showed Elias standing perfectly still with his hands up. It showed Vance screaming like a lunatic. It showed the arm twist. It showed the stolen valor comment. The internet did what the internet does. Within 2 hours, it had 2 million views. By the next morning, it was on CNN. The headline ran across the bottom of the screen, Hero Sergeant Treated Like Trash. Elias didn't watch the news. He was at the VA hospital getting his shoulder imaged. The rotator cuff was re-torn. He would need surgery. Again. The lawsuit was filed 3 days later. It was a masterclass in legal destruction. Claim 1, unlawful arrest. Claim 2, excessive force. Claim 3, violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ignoring the knee injury. Claim 4, violation of civil rights under Section 1983. Claim 5, defamation the stolen valor comment. Brad Miller, the manager at the recycling center, thought he could hide. He couldn't. The waste management company fired him before the sun went down on the second day. His statement to the press, I was just following protocol, was torn apart when the 911 tape was released. He's looting.
He has a knife. The lie was on tape. He was charged with filing a false police report. But the real focus was on the city. The police chief tried to hold a press conference. He talked about context and split-second decisions. Then a reporter asked, "Chief, the man was standing still with his hands up. He is a 58-year-old disabled veteran. What context justifies twisting his arm behind his back?" The chief had no answer. The internal affairs investigation was fast-tracked. They pulled Vance's file. They found the 9 previous complaints. They found the pattern. They found that Lieutenant Higgins had actually recommended Vance for remedial training 6 months ago, but it had been blocked by the union. The system was on trial, and Elias Thorne was the witness for the prosecution. The city knew they couldn't win. If they put Elias Thorne's Silver Star recipient grandfather church deacon in front of a jury showing pictures of his re-torn shoulder and the bruises on his wrists, the jury would give him the keys to the city treasury. They settled in mediation, $4.8 million. It was one of the largest settlements in the department's history. But for Elias, it wasn't about the check. Part of the settlement agreement required a public apology and the immediate termination of Officer Kyle Vance. Vance was not just fired. The department petitioned the state board to decertify him, ensuring he could never wear a badge in that state again. 6 months after the incident, Elias stood before the city council. The room was packed. He wore a suit, his Silver Star lapel pin catching the light. His left arm was in a sling recovering from the surgery. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He spoke into the microphone with the same quiet power he had used in the recycling yard. "You paid me $4.8 million, Elias said. "You think that fixes it. You think money washes away the stain. It doesn't." He looked at the council members. "I served this country for 30 years. I defended the rights of people I've never met. And when I came home, I expected to be treated like a citizen. Instead, I was treated like an enemy combatant in my own hometown." He paused. "Officer Vance is gone. That's good." But the manager who called him, he saw a black man and saw a criminal. The officer saw a black man and saw a threat. Until you change the eyes of the people you hire, you're just going to keep writing checks, and one day the check won't be enough. One day the city will burn. He walked away from the podium. The room was silent. That evening, Elias sat on his front porch. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the neighborhood. His duplex renovation was finished. He had hired a young kid from the neighborhood to finish the copper work. He held a challenge coin in his good hand. It was heavy brass with the insignia of his old unit. "Send me," the motto read. He rubbed his thumb over the raised letters. He was tired. He was rich technically, but he felt poorer in spirit. He had believed in the system because he had been part of the system. Now he knew that the uniform he had worn was the only thing that had protected him from the reality of his skin color. And without the uniform, he was just another target. He took a sip of iced tea. He watched a police cruiser drive slowly past his house. The officer inside waved. It was a wave of recognition, of respect, maybe even fear. Elias didn't wave back. He just watched until the car turned the corner and disappeared. We have to ask ourselves, why does a black man need a Silver Star and a military ID to be treated with basic human dignity? Why is the default assumption criminal instead of citizen? If this story made you angry, if it made you think, please hit that like button and share it. We need to keep telling these stories until the reality changes. What do you think, should officers be personally liable for settlements when they violate civil rights? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.
Turn around, hands on your head. Now.
My hands are empty. I am complying.
Don't move, you had a weapon.
It's a bike tool. It's on the ground. Look.
Get on your knees.
I can't. Service injury. I will stand still.
Give me your ID.
What crime am I suspected of, officer?
The voice cracked with a mixture of adrenaline and fear, the kind of high-pitched desperation that usually signals a man who has lost control of a situation before it has even begun. But the man on the receiving end of the scream didn't flinch. He didn't scramble. He didn't panic. Elias Thorne, 58 years old, stood next to his bicycle on the perfectly manicured grass of Limit Park. In his right hand, he held a small silver multi-tool, specifically the 4mm hex wrench he had been using to tighten a loose caliper on his disc brakes. He looked at the young officer whose service pistol was unholstered and pointed directly at Elias's chest. Elias didn't drop the tool immediately because sudden movements around a terrified man with a gun were a good way to die. Instead, he slowly opened his hand, letting the tool fall to the grass with a soft thud, and raised his empty palms to shoulder height. "Officer," Elias said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried the weight of command. "I am complying. My hands are empty. I am standing still." "Turn around! Turn around now! Face away from me!" Officer Kyle Miller yelled, stepping over the curb and onto the grass, his weapon shaking slightly. "I am turning," Elias said, executing a slow, deliberate pivot. He kept his movements fluid, predictable. He knew exactly what the officer was seeing, or what he thought he was seeing. He saw a broad-shouldered black man in athletic gear holding a metal object. Elias, however, saw something very different. He saw a police officer, maybe 28 years old, with poor trigger discipline and sweat already beading on his forehead despite the mild 70-degree weather. Elias had led men into clearing buildings in Fallujah. He had managed checkpoints in Helmand Province where the threat of a suicide vest was a daily reality. He knew what a threat looked like, and he knew what fear looked like. Officer Miller was terrified, and that made him dangerous. Before we go any further into this absolute travesty of justice, I need you to take a second. Look at the situation. A retired Marine Master Sergeant, a man who served his country for 24 years, is staring down the barrel of a Glock because he was fixing his bicycle. If that makes your blood boil, if you believe that our veterans and our citizens deserve better than this, hit that like button right now. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and let me know if you think police training in this country needs a serious overhaul. You need to see how this ends, because the way this officer destroys his own career in the next 20 minutes is something you will not believe. Elias had been enjoying a Saturday ride. It was his ritual. 20 miles on the trails, 10 miles on the road. He was riding a custom-built carbon fiber mountain bike, a machine that cost more than the Honda Civic Officer Miller had driven to work that morning. Elias was dressed in high-performance cycling gear. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't lurking. He was in a public park in broad daylight fixing a mechanical issue. "Get on your knees, cross your ankles," Miller shouted, closing the distance. "I have bad knees from the service officer," Elias said calmly, not moving. "I can stand with my hands on my head, or I can lean against the tree. But if I get on my knees, I will not be able to get back up without assistance. I am not resisting. I am informing you of a medical limitation." "I didn't ask for your medical history. Get on the ground." Miller stepped closer, reaching for his taser with his offhand, clearly confused by Elias's refusal to cower. Elias remained standing. He had faced down warlords who commanded armies. He was not going to prostrate himself in the dirt for a boy with a badge who couldn't tell the difference between a bicycle tool and a knife. To understand how we got to this point, you have to look at the 3 minutes prior. Officer Kyle Miller had been patrolling the perimeter of the park, a wealthy suburb where the residents were quick to call the police on anything that looked out of place. The call had come in from a passing motorist. "Suspicious male subject, black muscular build, crouching near the bushes by the east gate. He's holding something metal, might be trying to break into the utility shed." That was it. That was the entire sum of the intelligence Miller had. A competent officer would have observed. A competent officer would have driven by, rolled down the window, and assessed the situation. He would have seen a man in spandex shorts and a cycling jersey adjusting a derailleur. But Miller wasn't operating on competence that afternoon. He was operating on assumption. He saw Elias. He saw the expensive houses in the background, and he saw the bike.
In Miller's mind, the equation didn't add up. A black man, a $6,000 bicycle, and a tool in his hand. He didn't see a cyclist. He saw a thief stripping a stolen bike or a burglar preparing to break into a home. Miller had slammed his cruiser into park, jumping out with his hand already on his holster. He hadn't asked a question. He hadn't issued a greeting. He had gone straight to lethal force threat. Now standing 10 feet from Elias Miller, holstered his firearm but kept his hand resting on it, a position of dominance. "You're lucky I didn't drop you," Miller panted. "What are you doing here?" "I'm fixing my bicycle," Elias said, his hands still interlocked behind his head. The rear caliper was rubbing. I stopped to adjust it. "This your bike?" Miller asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Yes, it is." "Got a receipt for it on you?" Elias turned his head slightly. "Officer, I don't carry receipts for my property when I go for a ride. Do you carry the receipt for your watch?" Miller's face flushed a deep red. He stepped into Elias's personal space. "Don't get smart with me. You match the description of a suspicious person report. Someone saw you lurking with a weapon." "I wasn't lurking. I was crouching to reach the bolt, and the weapon is a Park Tool multi-wrench. It's on the grass right there." Elias nodded toward the small silver object. "It looked like a knife from the road," Miller snapped. "And you didn't drop it when I told you to." "I dropped it as soon as it was safe to do so. Dropping a metal object rapidly while an officer is pointing a firearm at you is a good way to get shot. I moved with caution." "You're detained," Miller said. "I need your ID." Elias took a slow breath. He knew the law. He had spent his post-military career working as a security consultant for federal contractors. He knew the Fourth Amendment better than the man standing in front of him. "Officer," Elias said, keeping his voice level, "you have detained me at gunpoint. You need reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime, am committing a crime, or am about to commit a crime. Fixing a bicycle in a public park is not a crime. Being a black man in a public park is not a crime. Unless you can articulate a specific crime you suspect me of, I am not required to provide identification." Miller froze. He hadn't expected a lecture on constitutional law. He expected fear. He expected compliance. He expected, "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." The fact that this man was standing tall, speaking clearly and looking him in the eye was infuriating. It challenged his authority, and for a man like Kyle Miller, that was the ultimate offense. "I'm investigating a report of a suspicious person," Miller repeated, falling back on the vague justification he used for every pretextual stop he made. "That gives me the right to ID you." A vague report of suspicious behavior without a specific criminal act does not constitute reasonable suspicion, Elias corrected him. The Supreme Court has been clear on this. Florida versus JL. An anonymous tip that a person is carrying a gun is not without more sufficient to justify a police officer's stop and frisk of that person. You have even less than that. You have a report of a man fixing a bike. The dynamic in the park had shifted. It was no longer just a cop and a suspect. It was a spectacle. Two women walking their golden retrievers had stopped on the sidewalk about 30 feet away. A man jogging had paused, pulling out his phone. Miller noticed the audience. He saw the phone raise the camera lens pointed at him. In a sane world, this would be the moment to de-escalate. To say, "Okay, sir, my mistake, have a nice day." But Miller felt the eyes on him and his ego demanded he win the encounter. Backing down now would look like weakness. "I'm not going to ask you again," Miller said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Give me your ID or you're going to jail." "For what?" Elias asked. "What is the charge?" "Failure to identify. Obstruction." Delaware is not a stop and ID state unless you have reasonable suspicion of a crime, Elias said. "You have not articulated a crime. Therefore, I am not obligated to identify myself. I am asking you, officer,
Are you placing me under arrest or am I free to go? You're not free to go until I say you're free to go, Miller shouted, stepping forward and grabbing Elias's wrist. Elias didn't pull away. He didn't resist. He let Miller grab him. He knew that any physical reaction, no matter how natural, would be used to justify a beating. Officer, you are now laying hands on me without cause. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights. You are also violating department policy on de-escalation. I strongly suggest you rethink your next move. You don't tell me what to do. Miller twisted Elias's arm behind his back, forcing him slightly off balance. You want to play lawyer? You can do it from a cell. Hey, the jogger with the phone shouted. He wasn't doing anything. I saw him fixing his chain 5 minutes ago. He's just riding his bike. Miller whipped his head around. Back up, or you're next. This is an active investigation. Investigation of what? The jogger yelled back. Biking while black. Miller's face contorted. He turned back to Elias, taking out his anger on the man in his grip. He kicked Elias's legs apart harder than necessary. Spread 'em. I said spread 'em. I am complying, Elias said through gritted teeth. The pain in his bad knee flared a sharp reminder of a mortar attack in 2004, but he didn't make a sound. Officer, listen to me closely. You are making a mistake that you will not be able to undo. My name is Master Sergeant Elias Thorne, United States Marine Corps retired. I have no warrants. I have no record. This bicycle belongs to me. If you arrest me, you are kidnapping me under the color of law. Marine, huh? Miller scoffed. Yeah, and I'm a Navy SEAL. Stolen valor is a crime too, buddy. The disrespect hung in the air, heavy and toxic. To dismiss a man's service to mock it while violating his rights was a level of arrogance that Elias hadn't encountered since dealing with entitled contractors in the Green Zone. Check the wallet, Elias said calmly. But if you go into my pockets, that is a search, and I do not consent to a search. I'm arresting you for obstruction, Miller announced. Now I can search you all I want. Incident to arrest. He patted Elias down, aggressively shoving his hand into the jersey pocket. He pulled out a slim, carbon fiber wallet. He didn't open it yet. He just stuffed it into his own pocket. You're done, Miller said. Turn around. The metallic ratchet of the handcuffs was the only sound in the immediate vicinity. Click, click, tight, too tight. Miller squeezed the cuffs down until they bit into the skin of Elias's wrists. Elias didn't complain. He knew that complaining gave the officer satisfaction. He stood tall, his posture perfect, his chin up. He looked like a prisoner of war who still commanded more respect than his captors. Is the camera rolling? Elias asked, loud enough for the jogger to hear. I got it all, the jogger replied. I got him pointing the gun. I got him grabbing you. Good, Elias said. Do not stop recording. Miller grabbed Elias by the arm and marched him toward the patrol car parked on the grass. Get moving. What about my bicycle? Elias asked. That is a $6,000 piece of property. You cannot leave it unsecured in a public park. Not my problem, Miller said. Should have thought about that before you decided to act like a jerk. Officer, Elias said, stopping his forward momentum just enough to look Miller in the eye. If that bike is stolen because you abandoned it, the city will be liable, and I will ensure the cost comes out of your pension. Miller shoved him, a hard two-handed shove against the back. Get in the car. Elias stumbled but caught himself. He ducked his head and maneuvered into the back of the cruiser. The plastic seat was hard, the space cramped. The plexiglass divider was scratched and yellowing. As Miller slammed the door shutting off the airflow, Elias looked out the window. The jogger was walking over to the bike. I'll watch it, the jogger yelled, pointing at the bike. I'm calling my wife to bring the truck. We'll hold it for you. What's your name? Elias Thorne, Elias shouted through the glass. Thank you, Miller got into the front seat. He was breathing heavy, his chest heaving. He looked at himself in the rear-view mirror, adjusting his collar. He looked like a man trying to convince himself he had done the right thing. He picked up the radio. "Dispatch 1 in custody. Transporting to Central. Obstruction and disorderly. Copy 10 to 15. Dispatch crackled back. Miller put the car in drive and peeled out, tearing up the grass as he merged back onto the road. He didn't look back at the bike. He didn't look at Elias. He turned up the air conditioning, trying to cool the sweat on his face. The ride was silent. Elias sat perfectly still. His mind was compartmentalizing. He was no longer a cyclist on a Saturday. He was in mission mode. Objective, document everything. Survive the custody. Dismantle the opposition legally. He memorized the time on the dashboard clock. He memorized the route. He watched Miller's eyes in the mirror, noting the dilated pupils, the nervous tics. This wasn't a bad cop. This was a weak man with power. And those were the most dangerous kind. "You know," Miller said suddenly, breaking the silence as they waited at a red light, "if you had just shown me the ID, we wouldn't be here. If you had respected the Constitution you swore to uphold," Elias replied, his voice calm and cold, "you wouldn't be about to lose your job." Miller laughed, a short, nervous bark. "I'm not losing my job over a resisting charge. You guys always say that. I'll have your badge. I'm still here." "We shall see," Elias said, and then he closed his eyes, centering his breathing, waiting for the war to begin. The intake area of the precinct smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies, a sensory combination Elias had encountered in detention centers halfway across the world. Miller marched Elias in, gripping his arm with unnecessary force, parading his collar past the other officers. "What you got, Miller?" asked a patrolman at a desk. "Another sovereign citizen type." Miller bragged his voice too loud. "Refused to ID, resisting, the usual." Elias said nothing. He walked where he was guided. They reached the booking desk. Sitting behind the high counter was Sergeant Thomas Kowalski. Kowalski was 55, a man with gray, crew-cut hair and skin that looked like worn leather. He had been on the force for 30 years. Before that, he had been Army infantry. He had a specific way of looking at people, judging not their clothes, but their bearing. Kowalski looked at Miller, then he looked at Elias. He saw the expensive cycling gear. He saw the posture. He saw the calm in Elias's eyes. He didn't see a sovereign citizen. "Uncuff him for processing." Kowalski grunted. Miller fumbled for his keys. "He's feisty, Sarge. Watch him." Kowalski rolled his eyes. "He's handcuffed and surrounded by cops. Take them off." Miller removed the cuffs. Elias brought his hands forward, rubbing his wrists where the metal had cut into the skin. He didn't complain. He placed his hands flat on the counter. "Personal property," Kowalski said. "Put it on the counter." Miller reached into his pocket and pulled out Elias's wallet. He tossed it onto the counter with a slap. "That's it. And the keys to a bike we left at the scene." Kowalski picked up the wallet. It was high-quality, minimalistic. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the driver's license. Elias Thorne. Address in the Hillcrest District expensive. Clean record implied. Then Kowalski flipped the flap. His eyes stopped. He went still. There behind the clear plastic was a Department of Defense identification card. Blue stripe. Retired. Rank Master Sergeant E8, United States Marine Corps, and behind that, a second card, a white access badge for a major defense contractor with a clearance level indicator that Kowalski recognized immediately. Kowalski looked up slowly. He looked at Elias, really looked at him this time. He saw the scars on the knees. He saw the way Elias stood at parade rest without even thinking about it. "Master Sergeant," Kowalski said, his voice changing tone completely. It was no longer the voice of a cop speaking to a perp. It was the voice of a soldier speaking to a senior NCO. "Sergeant." Elias nodded. Kowalski turned his gaze to Officer Miller.
The look on his face could have peeled paint off the walls. "Miller, step into the hallway." "What? Why I gotta fill out the hallway now?" Kowalski didn't shout, but the command was absolute. Miller blinked confused, but he walked toward the door. Kowalski looked back at Elias. "Sir, are you injured?" "My wrists are lacerated. My knee is aggravated, but I am functional." Did he verify this ID in the field?" Kowalski held up the military card. "He refused to look at it until after I was arrested. He assumed I was a thief because I was fixing my bike." Kowalski closed his eyes for a brief second, a pain passing over his face. He knew. He knew exactly what had happened. He knew Miller. He knew the complaints. And he knew that arresting a retired E8 with a high-level security clearance for fixing a bike was a catastrophe. "Don't say another word, Master Sergeant," Kowalski said softly. "I'm calling the watch commander." Captain Henderson's office was upstairs, but he was down in the booking area in less than 3 minutes. Henderson was a pragmatic man, a political survivor who was trying to clean up the department's image. When Kowalski had called him and said, "Miller arrested a retired Marine Master Sergeant for fixing a bike, and he's got a top-secret clearance card in his wallet." Henderson had felt a migraine start instantly behind his right eye. Henderson walked into the holding area. Elias was sitting on a metal bench, not in a cell. Kowalski had given him a bottle of water. "Mr. Thorne?" Henderson asked. "Master Sergeant Thorne retired." Elias corrected him gently but firmly. "Right. Master Sergeant, I'm Captain Henderson, watch commander." "Captain." "I've been briefed by Sergeant Kowalski. I'd like to review the body cam footage before we proceed with any booking." "I insist that you do," Elias said. "And I want the footage preserved. I want the audit trail marked so that it cannot be deleted or edited." Henderson nodded. "Sergeant Kowalski has already flagged it. Come with me." They walked to a computer terminal in the back office. Miller was standing there looking sullen and defensive. "Captain, he was resisting. He wouldn't show ID," Miller started. "Shut up," Henderson said. He didn't look at Miller. He typed in his password and pulled up the feed from Miller's camera. The video played. The sunlight, the park, the scream. "Drop the weapon." Henderson watched in silence. He saw the tool fall. He heard Elias explain. He heard Miller's escalation. He heard the refusal to articulate a crime. He heard the arrest. When the video ended, the room was dead silent. Henderson replayed the part where Elias offered to show the ID if a crime was articulated and Miller screamed at him. Henderson turned his chair slowly to face Miller. "He was fixing a bike, Miller. He had a hex wrench. It looked like a knife. It looked like a tool. And even if you thought it was a weapon once he dropped it, he was compliant. You had no RS, you had a hunch, and a bad one." Henderson stood up. He looked tired. "You arrested a federal judge's neighbor, basically. Do you know who this man is?" "He's a suspect. He's a decorated combat veteran with 24 years of service, and you treated him like a gangbanger because you couldn't handle your own ego." Henderson turned to Elias. "Master Sergeant, you are free to go. The charges are dropped. We will drive you back to your bicycle immediately. I apologize on behalf of the department." Elias didn't smile. He didn't look relieved. He stood up slowly. "Captain, I appreciate the release, but an apology does not cure a constitutional violation. I was kidnapped. I was assaulted. My property was abandoned. I want a copy of the booking report, a copy of the incident report, and the badge numbers of every officer involved in my processing." "We can handle this informally." Henderson tried his voice lowering. "We can expunge the arrest record right now, like it never happened." "It did happen," Elias said. "And it happened on camera. And it happened in front of witnesses. If you sweep this under the rug, Miller will do it again next week to a kid who doesn't have my rank or my resources. And that kid might end up dead." Elias looked at Miller, who was staring at the floor. "I'm not doing this for me, Captain. I'm doing it for the uniform. The one you wear and the one I used to wear. Bad troops rot the unit. You have a rotten apple." The lawsuit landed on the city attorney's desk on Tuesday morning. Thorne versus City of Wilmington Officer Kyle Miller et al. It was a masterclass in legal drafting. It alleged unlawful seizure, excessive force, false arrest, and violation of civil rights under 42 U.S.C., paragraph 1983. But the lawsuit wasn't what caused the firestorm. It was the video. The jogger's video hit social media first. A shaky cell phone clip showing a calm black man being twisted up by a screaming cop. The caption read, "Cop arrests Marine vet for fixing his bike. Shameful." Then the body cam footage leaked. To this day, the department claims it was a FOIA processing error, but rumor in the precinct was that someone disgusted by Miller's actions, maybe even Kowalski, had made sure the local news got the file. The contrast was devastating. Split screen on the nightly news. On the left, Elias Thorne, calm articulate, citing the law. On the right, Officer Miller, frantic, red-faced, screaming conflicting orders. "I am complying." Elias's voice from the TV resonated in living rooms across America. The public reaction was immediate and nuclear. Veteran groups rallied. The Marine Corps League issued a statement supporting Thorne. Civil rights groups joined forces. It was the perfect storm, a victim who was unimpeachable and an aggressor who was indefensible. Investigative journalists started digging into Miller's past. They found what Elias had suspected. Miller had been on the force for 5 years. In that time, 80% of his suspicious person stops involved black males. He had 18 complaints for discourtesy and excessive force, all dismissed by Internal Affairs as unfounded or within policy. But they couldn't dismiss this one. The video was too clear. The audio was too damning. "I'm a Navy SEAL," Miller had scoffed on the tape. That soundbite played on repeat. Stolen valor groups tore him apart online. It revealed his character a liar, an insecure bully who felt the need to belittle a man who was his superior in every conceivable way. The department tried to hold the line for a week. The union rep went on TV claiming Miller feared for his life because of the unknown metal object. The anchor simply played the clip of the tiny hex wrench falling into the grass. The defense crumbled on live air. 6 weeks after the incident, the hammer fell. The internal investigation was scathing. It found that Miller had lacked reasonable suspicion for the stop. It found that the arrest was retaliatory. It found that he had violated the department's code of conduct regarding truthfulness and professional demeanor. Officer Kyle Miller was terminated, not allowed to resign, fired. The termination for cause meant his law enforcement certification was revoked. He would never carry a badge or a gun again. He was 28 years old and his career was over. The city settled with Elias Thorne for $450,000. They wanted to avoid a jury trial at all costs. They knew that if a jury saw that video and then saw Elias in his dress blues on the stand, the verdict would have been in the millions. Elias didn't keep a dime. On a rainy Tuesday, Elias stood in front of the local VFW hall. The press was there. He looked tired, but resolute. "I didn't file this lawsuit for the money," Elias told the cameras. "I filed it because accountability is the only language power understands." Officer Miller wasn't just one bad apple. He was the product of a system that failed to correct him. A system that looked at his numbers and saw productivity instead of harassment. He held up a check. "This entire settlement is being donated to the National Veterans Legal Services Program and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. It will go to help veterans who are mistreated by police and to help those who cannot afford to fight back." Elias walked away from the podium. He didn't take questions. He got into his car, drove home, and went to his garage. His bike was there hanging on the wall. The jogger had kept it safe just as he promised. Elias took it down, checked the rear caliper, it was still perfectly adjusted, and prepped his gear. He was going for a ride. The story of Elias Thorne is a victory, yes. But it is a haunting one. Because for every Elias Thorne men with the rank, the knowledge, and the calm to survive that encounter, there are thousands of young men who panic, thousands who run, thousands who get scared and make a sudden move, and they don't get a settlement. They get a funeral. Kyle Miller is gone from the force, but the mindset that created him is still out there. It's in the training that teaches fear over de-escalation. It's in the culture that views citizens as combatants. So I have to ask you, what would you have done? If a gun was pointed at you for fixing your own property, could you have stayed this calm? And more importantly, do you think justice was truly served here? Or was this just damage control by the city? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We need to keep talking about this. We need to keep watching, because the camera doesn't blink, and neither should we. If you believe in holding the line for real justice, subscribe to the channel. We're just getting started.
Case analysis finalized. To stay updated with transparent operations, please hit like and subscribe. Thank you for choosing Bodycam Incident Reports.